The morning light spilled softly through the glass walls of their ocean view penthouse, painting everything in shades of gold. Lena Foster sat at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from her, Ryan adjusted his tie, navy blue, silk, the same color as the sky that framed his reflection. "Big day?" she asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ryan looked up briefly. "Always is," he said, pressing his lips to her forehead, careful not to smudge her makeup. His cologne lingered long after the door shut behind him. To anyone else, they were the picture of success, a power couple adored by the press, envied by friends. But beneath the curated perfection lay a silence that stretched wider with each passing day. Their laughter had turned to polite conversation, their affection replaced by routine. Lena often wondered when love had started to feel like a performance. She stared at her wedding ring, the diamond catching light in cold brilliance. Once it symbolized devotion. Now it felt like an anchor. Outside, waves crashed against the shore, rhythmic, indifferent. The sound reminded her of time slipping away, of years spent believing that stability was the same as happiness. By noon, she was at her home office, surrounded by papers she barely read. Her role as a consultant, as Ryan called it, was more of a courtesy than a necessity. He insisted she didn't need to work, that he could take care of everything. And for a long time, she had let him, until lately. Her phone buzzed. A notification flashed, transfer complete. She frowned, opening the message, but it was only a payment confirmation for a charity she supported. Still, the phrase transfer complete lingered in her mind, unsettling for reasons she couldn't explain. That evening, Ryan returned home late, smelling faintly of whiskey and perfume. Lena didn't ask. She simply watched him loosen his tie and pour himself another drink. "You're quiet tonight," he said without looking up. "Just tired," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "You worry too much, Lena. Everything's fine. You should trust me more." The words slid under her skin like ice. Later that night, when the city outside sank into silence, she awoke to the sound of Ryan's voice. Faint, muffled. She followed it through the darkened hallway until she saw him, standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and careful. "She'll never know," he whispered. Lena froze. Her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. He turned slightly, the blue glow of the phone lighting his face, calm, confident, secretive. She retreated quietly before he noticed, returning to bed with trembling hands. The phrase echoed through her mind, "She'll never know." By morning, he was gone again, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and a note on the counter. "Meeting in Palo Alto. Back late. Love you." She stared at the words for a long time. In the reflection of the kitchen window, she barely recognized herself, a woman living a life others envied, yet quietly unraveling inside it. Something inside her shifted that day. A subtle awareness, the first spark of doubt. She picked up the note, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer already filled with others like it. Little tokens of absence disguised as affection. As the day stretched on, Lena returned to her desk, her gaze fixed on her laptop screen, though her mind was miles away. For the first time, she opened the financial dashboard Ryan had set up for them. Numbers flickered across the page, neat, organized, reassuring. Yet beneath them, she sensed something hollow, like a smile hiding a lie. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her perfect marriage began to crack, and the silence that followed would soon become the loudest truth of her life. The following week unfolded in careful, quiet patterns. Ryan's absences grew longer, his explanations shorter. Lena kept her questions folded neatly behind polite smiles. Yet every instinct inside her whispered that something was shifting beneath the surface, something she could no longer ignore. On a rainy Tuesday morning, she sat before her computer, staring at the same financial dashboard she'd opened days ago. Numbers flickered softly on the screen, cold, digital truth disguised as order. But when she compared the figures with the printed statements in her hand, the totals didn't match. Not even close. Her pulse quickened. She double-checked every line. The missing amounts weren't small, 6 digits here, 7 there, scattered across different accounts. Together, They painted a picture of deliberate movement, not accident. When Ryan called that afternoon, his voice was as warm and practiced as ever. "Hey, sweetheart. Just checking in. Everything okay?" "Of course," Lena said evenly. "Just doing some financial housekeeping." A brief silence, then a casual laugh. "You and your numbers. Don't overthink it. The market's been crazy lately." She smiled into the phone, though her eyes never left the screen. "Right. Volatile as always." After he hung up, Lena sat motionless. She'd spent years trusting him with their finances, or rather, letting him manage everything while she stayed quietly grateful. But now, the blind trust that once felt like love began to feel like blindness. That night, she couldn't sleep. Rain tapped against the windows like restless thoughts. She rose from bed and wandered into Ryan's office, the one room he always kept locked, though he often forgot she had the spare key. The desk was immaculate, the drawers arranged with precision. Yet inside a folder marked Q4 adjustments, she found photocopies of transactions, accounts she didn't recognize, companies she'd never heard of. Her name appeared as a joint signatory, forged with near perfection. Her heart sank. By morning, she called the bank under the guise of a routine check. The representative confirmed what she already suspected. Several large withdrawals had been moved into private investment accounts under Helix Holdings sub-branch, a name that sounded eerily familiar. Helix, Ryan's company. Lena hung up slowly. The realization hit her in waves, not just the money, but the pattern. He was using their wealth to fund his ambition. At lunch, she met Ryan in their favorite restaurant downtown, the one overlooking the harbor, where they'd once celebrated anniversaries. The place was just as beautiful, but the air between them was sharp, thin. "You look tired," Ryan said, sipping his wine. "You're not worrying about that financial nonsense, are you?" "I'm fine," she replied, voice steady. "Just noticing a few inconsistencies." His jaw tightened, barely visible. "Lena, I told you, the markets fluctuate. Leave the business side to me." "Of course," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "You've always handled everything." He smiled, satisfied, leaning back like a man who'd won an argument he hadn't earned. But inside, something inside her crystallized, a quiet decision forming beneath the mask of compliance. When they returned home, Ryan retreated to his study. Lena sat by the window, listening to the hum of the city and the faint clatter of his keyboard. She opened her phone, created a hidden folder, and began saving screenshots of every suspicious transfer she could find. Her fingers trembled, but her mind was clear. Trust, once broken, doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks slowly, soundless at first, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the reflection of her face in the glass. Calm, determined, no longer naive. She closed the folder, locked her phone, and whispered to herself, "Everything leaves a trail." And in that moment, she decided she would follow his. 3 days later, Helix Dynamics hosted its annual corporate gala, a glittering celebration of success, ambition, and quiet deceit. Lena hadn't planned to attend, but after the discoveries of the past week, curiosity outweighed discomfort. If Ryan was hiding something, tonight might expose it. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter. Strings of gold and white light danced across champagne glasses. Lena entered alone, every head turning as she passed. Her crimson dress, a deliberate choice, drew eyes and whispered speculation. But her own gaze was fixed on one man. Ryan. He stood near the stage, glass in hand, surrounded by executives. His charm was effortless, his laughter rehearsed. To anyone watching, he looked like the picture of success. To Lena, he looked like a stranger she used to love. She approached slowly, unnoticed at first. Then his smile faltered when he saw her. "Lena," he said smoothly, recovering. "Didn't expect you to come." "I wouldn't miss seeing your world," she replied, her tone light but edged. Before he could respond, a woman joined the circle, tall, poised, dressed in scarlet silk that mirrored Lena's. Her presence commanded attention. She extended a manicured hand. "Claudia Monroe," she said, smiling. "Ryan's boss, and Helix's new executive director." The world seemed to still. Lena shook her hand, the contact cold and brief. Lena Foster, Ryan's wife. For a flicker of a second, something unreadable passed between the two women. Curiosity, recognition, maybe warning. Ryan's eyes darted nervously between them. Claudia's laughter broke the tension. He's told me so much about you. You're quite the mystery, Mrs. Foster. Only to those who don't pay attention, Lena replied with quiet calm. As the evening went on, Lena watched. She noticed how Ryan leaned closer to Claudia when he spoke, how Claudia's hand occasionally brushed his sleeve. Small gestures that screamed intimacy to anyone looking closely enough. Every detail was a knife turned slowly in her chest. But Lena didn't flinch. She observed, memorized, calculated. Later, during the toast, Claudia stood at the podium, her voice smooth and confident. Helix Dynamics is built on trust, she declared, on loyalty between partners, both in business and in life. The crowd applauded. Lena's fingers tightened around her glass. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the applause faded, she slipped quietly onto the terrace, the night air cool against her flushed skin. City lights shimmered below, thousands of windows hiding thousands of secrets. She took a slow breath, fighting the tremor in her hands. From inside, she could still hear Ryan's laughter, lighter now, freer, as if the woman in red had replaced the life he once shared. A waiter passed, and Lena caught sight of Claudia again through the glass doors. Their eyes met briefly. Claudia smiled, a small, knowing curve of lips that said, "I've already won." Lena smiled back, a fraction colder. She set her empty glass on the railing, her reflection fractured in the city's glow. "You'll regret underestimating me," she whispered, the words barely audible beneath the hum of distant music. For the first time, her fear began to fade, replaced by something sharper, resolve. The night ended with applause and champagne, but Lena left early, her heels clicking with quiet purpose. She didn't know it yet, but the next morning, the first trail of untraceable money would lead directly to Claudia Monroe. Lena barely slept after the gala. Claudia Monroe's smile haunted her, polished, dangerous, and far too familiar. It wasn't just the flirtation or the glances she'd seen between her husband and his boss. It was the certainty behind Claudia's eyes, as if she already knew she'd taken something that belonged to Lena. By dawn, Lena was back at her desk, coffee untouched, laptop open. Her screen glowed with the same numbers she'd been studying for days. But this time, she searched deeper, through encrypted folders, archived emails, and digital shadows Ryan believed no one would find. And then she did. A transfer. Quiet. Precise. $25 million wired out 3 nights ago to an account under Monroe Strategic Holdings. The sender authorization listed her husband's digital signature, and beside it, in smaller print, L. Foster co-approval. Her breath caught. He'd forged her name again. Lena sat very still. The rage that flared inside her wasn't loud or explosive. It was cold, measured. The kind of anger that sharpens a person rather than breaks them. She traced the path of the transaction, her fingers steady on the keys. The shell company led to another, then another, a financial labyrinth designed to hide ownership. But every road, every disguise, led back to one destination, Claudia Monroe. Ryan wasn't just having an affair. He was transferring their future to fund it. At noon, she called the family's financial advisor, pretending to be casually curious about liquidity. When he mentioned that Ryan had been moving assets for investment diversification, she smiled through the line. Of course, just making sure everything's in place. But inside, her pulse thundered. That night, when Ryan returned home, she watched him from across the dinner table. He looked relaxed, too relaxed, scrolling through his phone between bites. The glow of the screen reflected off his wedding band, the same one he'd promised her forever with. "Busy day?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Work's been insane. Claudia's pushing a major merger. It's complicated. You wouldn't really get it." Lena tilted her head. "You're right," she said, her tone mild. "I probably wouldn't." He smiled, satisfied with her compliance, and returned to his phone. Later, when he showered, Lena entered his study again. She copied the encrypted bank records onto a flash drive, slipping it into the lining of her purse. Each click, each document saved, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. When she closed the laptop, she caught her reflection in the dark screen. Calm eyes, steady breath. No trace of the woman who once trusted blindly. She sat for a long moment, listening to the faint rhythm of running water from the bathroom. Somewhere inside, she knew she was crossing a line, one that would change everything. But betrayal demanded clarity, not mercy. Before leaving the room, she opened a drawer and found a note in Ryan's handwriting. Don't wait up. Late meeting with Claudia. Lena folded the paper neatly, just as she had with all the others. But this time, she didn't place it in her drawer of memories. She set it aflame in a candle's glow, watching it curl into ash. Tomorrow, she would begin tracing every transfer, every lie, until there was nothing left to hide. And when she was done, neither Ryan nor Claudia would ever see it coming. The morning came quietly, soft and deceptive. The sky outside glowed a tender shade of orange, the kind of sunrise that should have felt peaceful. But for Lena, it marked the moment everything she'd known began to dissolve. Ryan's side of the bed was cold. His suitcase, usually by the closet, was gone. She followed the faint scent of his cologne through the empty hallway until she reached the kitchen. On the counter sat a folded note beside a half-empty glass of whiskey. Business trip. Don't wait up. Take care of yourself. Lena read it once. Then again. The handwriting was neat, confident, utterly detached. She stared at the words until they blurred into one emotion: abandonment. He hadn't just left for a trip. He'd left her. The flash drive in her purse felt heavier now, like a pulse in her hand. She turned on the news, needing noise to drown the silence, and froze when the headline appeared across the screen. Helix Dynamics announces new leadership transition. Claudia Monroe named CEO. The reporter's voice continued, bright and oblivious. Sources confirm major shareholder restructuring within the company, following internal asset realignment. Realignment. A careful word for what Lena knew was theft. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old friend in finance blinked across the screen. Saw Ryan in Geneva this morning. Thought you were traveling with him? Lena's heart stuttered. Geneva, the global financial capital. The last puzzle piece clicked into place. By noon, her lawyer, Martin Graves, was sitting across from her in the study. His gray hair framed sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen too many ruined marriages and corporate scandals. Tell me everything, he said quietly. She handed him the flash drive, every document meticulously organized. He moved $200 million through shell accounts, she said. Claudia's name appears everywhere, and he used my authorization to do it. Martin examined files in silence. After several minutes, he exhaled. You have enough evidence to bury them both, but you need to be careful. If they realize you're aware, they'll start covering tracks. I don't want revenge, Lena lied softly. I just want the truth. Martin gave a faint, knowing smile. Truth always comes with a cost. That evening, she scrolled through social media, her hands trembling. There they were, Ryan and Claudia, photographed at a luxury resort in Lake Geneva, standing close beneath a golden sunset. Claudia's caption read, New beginnings with the one who makes me believe again. Beneath the post, thousands of hearts glowed red. Lena stared at the image until the room blurred. The betrayal wasn't just financial anymore. It was intimate, humiliating, public. The man who once held her in whispered promises was now flaunting his betrayal for the world to applaud. But as the shock faded, something else took its place: clarity. Love had blinded her. Money had bound her. But power was something she still had, though Ryan had no idea. At midnight, she opened her private vault, one he didn't even know existed. Inside, neatly arranged under her legal trust, were documents proving her silent ownership of Helix Dynamics. Ryan might have run off with her money, but the empire he thought he'd conquered was still hers. She stared at the signature, Lena Foster, her full legal name, hidden for years behind anonymity. The irony almost made her laugh. Outside, the first hint of dawn brushed against the windows. Another sunrise, soft and deceptive. Ryan thought he'd left her behind, but what he didn't know was that she owned every piece of the empire he'd just gambled his life on. And soon, he'd learn that no betrayal stays hidden when the betrayed controls the entire game. The sun had barely risen when Lena walked into the towering glass headquarters of Helix Dynamics, the empire Ryan had sacrificed their marriage to serve. To the staff, she was a familiar but distant figure, known only as Mrs. Foster, the elegant wife who occasionally appeared at charity events and company galas. No one realized the quiet woman in the cream trench coat was about to reclaim everything her husband thought he'd stolen. The marble floors echoed beneath her heels as she entered the private elevator reserved for board members. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked composed, hair perfectly pinned, face calm, but her heartbeat drummed with a steady, dangerous rhythm. In her hand, she held a manila folder containing documents Ryan never knew existed: trust certificates, shareholder authorizations, and the binding clause naming her as the majority owner of Helix Dynamics. The elevator doors opened onto the 38th floor, the boardroom. 12 men and women sat around the long table, their conversation falling silent as she entered. Among them was Martin Graves, her lawyer, standing near the window. His subtle nod reassured her she wasn't dreaming. "Good morning," Lena said evenly, placing the folder on the polished table. One of the directors cleared his throat. "Mrs. Foster, we weren't expecting you today." "I imagine not," she replied. "But given recent events, I thought it best to clarify a few misunderstandings about the company's ownership." Murmurs rippled through the room. On the wall screen behind her, a muted financial news broadcast displayed Claudia Monroe's face under the headline, "New CEO poised to reshape Helix Dynamics." Lena tapped the folder lightly. "Before any reshaping occurs," she said, "you should know who actually has the authority to approve it." Martin opened the folder and distributed the documents, the trust declaration signed years ago by the company's founding partners. Lena had been one of them, operating under her full name, Helena Grace Foster. The silence that followed was almost reverent. "You're telling us," one board member said slowly, "that you own 70% of Helix Dynamics?" Lena's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. "Yes, I chose to remain anonymous so the company could grow without my shadow. Unfortunately, anonymity has a cost. People forget who really built the foundation." Someone whispered, "Does Ryan know?" She met the man's gaze. "No, and I prefer it stay that way for now." Martin stepped forward. "Mrs. Foster has chosen to temporarily freeze all executive-level transactions pending internal review. Effective immediately, no further asset movements or mergers will be authorized without her written consent." The room buzzed with tension and disbelief. The financial director leaned back, shaking his head. "This will destroy Monroe's plans." Lena gathered her papers, her tone calm but final. "Then perhaps it's time those plans were destroyed." As she turned to leave, Martin whispered, "He'll find out soon." "They both will." "I'm counting on it," she said quietly. Outside, the city stretched before her, the same skyline Ryan had once called his kingdom. Now it belonged entirely to her. She paused in the corridor, her eyes catching her reflection in the glass. For years, she'd played the obedient wife, the silent observer. Now she was something else, the unseen force pulling every string. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number appeared. "He's back in town. They're announcing their engagement tonight." Lena's expression didn't change. She slipped the phone into her pocket, her voice barely above a whisper. Perfect timing. Because now, the game wasn't about discovery. It was about exposure. The city's evening lights shimmered like scattered diamonds across the skyline when Lena stepped out of her car in front of the Grand Marlowe Hotel. It was the same venue where Helix Dynamics once held its annual gala, where Ryan had toasted to forever under crystal chandeliers. Tonight, those same chandeliers illuminated something far more obscene: Ryan and Claudia's engagement party. Lena adjusted her black velvet dress, simple yet commanding. The hotel lobby was crowded with journalists, executives, and socialites. Everyone buzzed with the kind of gossip that could ruin reputations, and Lena was about to hand them a feast. Inside the ballroom, laughter floated through champagne bubbles and clinking glasses. Ryan stood at the center, holding Claudia's hand. He looked thinner, his jaw sharper, eyes restless with the triumph of a man who thought he'd won. Claudia wore red again. Her lips matched the color of her dress, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. When Ryan noticed Lena at the edge of the crowd, his face drained of color. "Lena?" he muttered under his breath, frozen in disbelief. Claudia turned. Her eyes flickered with recognition, then something closer to fear. She hadn't expected her to show up. Not tonight. Lena gave a polite smile. "Congratulations," she said softly, just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I came to witness the happy announcement." Ryan forced a stiff laugh, trying to recover. You didn't have to come. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," Lena replied smoothly. "After all, this company's success means so much to both of us." The word struck like a blade wrapped in silk. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances, sensing something beneath the surface. Moments later, Claudia clinked her glass for silence. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice poised, practiced. "Tonight isn't just about love, it's about new beginnings. Ryan and I are thrilled to announce that you've built your future on someone else's foundation." Lena interrupted gently. The room fell into stunned silence. Ryan's face twisted. "Lena, don't do this here." "Why not?" she said, tilting her head. "It seems like the perfect time to tell everyone that you drained our joint account. The same account tied to my corporation's assets. The same corporation you believed belonged to your boss." Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. A few reporters lowered their glasses, already pulling out phones. Claudia's composure cracked. "What are you implying?" "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Lena said. "I'm simply clarifying ownership." She reached into her clutch and produced a single envelope, placing it on the table beside the cake. "That's the official statement confirming the company's controlling shares, all in my name. Effective immediately, any pending appointments or mergers are nullified." Ryan stood frozen, the color gone from his face. The truth hit him in waves. She hadn't been the dependent wife he pitied. She had been the power behind everything he'd ever touched. Lena smiled faintly. "Enjoy your evening. It might be your last celebration funded by my money." As she turned to leave, the murmurs swelled into chaos. Cameras flashed. Ryan's voice broke through the noise, desperate, shaking. "Lena, wait, please." But she didn't. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing off the chaos below. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked calm, victorious. Yet deep inside, something darker stirred. Vengeance had begun, but it wasn't over yet. By dawn, the glittering chaos of the engagement party had turned into a public relations nightmare. News outlets swarmed with headlines. Helix CEO's engagement implodes amid ownership scandal. Videos of Lena's calm revelation had gone viral overnight. Her poised smile as she exposed the truth became a symbol of poetic vengeance, and Ryan's humiliation became corporate legend. Lena watched it all from her penthouse, coffee in hand, eyes steady. She hadn't planned the timing to be cruel, only precise. But as she saw Ryan's picture flash across the screen, pale and broken, a strange ache stirred in her chest. Love didn't vanish easily. It decayed slowly, leaving its poison behind. Her phone buzzed. Martin Graves again. She answered. "It's begun," he said grimly. "Claudia resigned an hour ago. Investors are in panic mode. Ryan tried to access his Helix accounts, but his credentials have been revoked. He's locked out completely." Lena's voice was cool. "Good. That's what he deserves." Martin hesitated. "He's not taking it well. There's talk he showed up at Claudia's place last night, drunk angry. Security had to escort him out." Lena's grip on the cup tightened. "He'll survive. He's always been resourceful." But she wasn't entirely sure. By afternoon, the company was in free fall. Stock values dipped 15%. Board members scrambled to stabilize the narrative. Lena arrived at headquarters just as a crowd of reporters filled the lobby, shouting questions. "Mrs. Foster, did you plan this from the start? Is it true you own 70% of Helix? Will you be taking over as CEO?" She didn't respond, only gave a brief, practiced smile before the guards cleared a path. Inside, the mood was chaos, panicked assistants, phones ringing nonstop, and whispers that Claudia Monroe had fled the city. In the executive office, the blinds were half drawn, casting stripes of light across the desk where Ryan once sat. Lena stood in the doorway, silent. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, a mix of cedar and arrogance. Martin entered behind her, holding a folder. Here are the official board transfer documents. You'll need to sign before the market opens tomorrow. Lena nodded but didn't move. It's strange, she murmured. He spent years trying to control this place. And in one night, it slipped from his hands. Martin's tone softened. You knew this would happen. Yes, she said, but I didn't expect to feel empty. There was a long pause. Lena, he said carefully, there's something else. Ryan's accounts show multiple withdrawals leading to offshore destinations. Not just the $200 million. It's bigger. He may have hidden more assets before he left. She turned sharply. Before he left? Martin hesitated. He hasn't been seen since last night. Lena's pulse quickened. You're saying he's gone? His phone's off. His car's missing. And the police found a note in his apartment, but they won't tell us what it says. Lena's world stilled. For a moment, the satisfaction of revenge curdled into dread. She'd wanted justice, not disappearance. She looked out the window, at the city below, vast, glittering, cold. Ryan had built his empire on deceit, but part of her had hoped he'd live long enough to face it. Martin's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, face paling. It's the police. They found something near the bridge. Lena didn't need to ask what. Her breath hitched, and the coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering across the floor. Outside, the world was still spinning, markets, news cycles, life. But for her, everything stopped. The air in the interrogation room was cold, almost sterile, the kind of chill that stripped people of their masks. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead, flickering occasionally, bathing the gray walls in a tired glow. Lena sat at the metal table, hands folded neatly in front of her. Across from her, the empty chair waited. Detective Ramos stood by the door, his voice low. You don't have to do this, Mrs. Foster. We can handle him. Lena's gaze stayed fixed on the chair. No, she said quietly. This is between us. Moments later, the door opened. Ryan Foster was led inside, escorted by two officers. He looked nothing like the man who once charmed boardrooms and camera flashes. His beard was unkempt, his eyes sunken, his wrists cuffed. The white dress shirt he wore was wrinkled, stained, a ghost of his former confidence. The officers left, and the door clicked shut behind them. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Ryan finally looked up. You came, he muttered, voice hoarse. Lena's reply was steady. You left me no choice. He gave a dry, bitter laugh. You wanted this. You got everything, didn't you? My career, my reputation, my life. She leaned forward slightly. You took $200 million from our account, Ryan. You left me, lied to me, and tried to marry your boss for power. What did you expect me to do? Watch quietly. Ryan looked at her with a hollow stare. You don't understand. I loved you once, but you were untouchable, unreachable. Everything about you was control. You owned me long before I tried to escape. Lena's jaw tightened. And Claudia, was she your freedom? He hesitated, eyes darting away. She was convenient. She had access, influence. I thought if I could rise high enough, maybe I'd stop feeling small. You felt small because you made yourself small, Lena said. You couldn't stand being with someone stronger than you. Ryan's voice cracked. You humiliated me, Lena. In front of the world. You humiliated yourself. She shot back. I just revealed the truth. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the light seemed louder, harsher. Then Ryan exhaled, eyes glassy. Do you know what it's like to lose everything in one night? To realize the person you thought you were smarter than was always 10 steps ahead? Lena's voice softened slightly. Do you know what it's like to wake up beside someone you thought you could trust, only to find out he's been emptying your accounts in the dark? He looked down, shoulders slumped. I wasn't going to marry her, he said after a pause. Not really. It was all a setup, a deal that fell apart. Claudia turned on me when she realized I didn't have control of the company anymore. When I left that note, I wasn't planning to disappear. I was planning to end it. Lena's breath caught. The bridge. He nodded faintly. I couldn't jump. I kept thinking about how you'd look when you heard the news. Cold. Detached. Victorious. Her throat tightened. You don't get to make me the villain of your story, Ryan. He smiled weakly. Maybe we both are. The door opened, breaking the silence. Detective Ramos stepped inside. Time's up. Ryan stood, chains rattling softly. He hesitated before turning toward her. For what it's worth, he said quietly. You were always the better one. I just couldn't stand knowing it. Lena didn't answer. She simply watched as the officers let him out, his figure fading down the hall like a shadow, swallowed by the light. When the door closed again, she sat alone, staring at the cold metal surface of the table. In the reflection, her face looked calm, but her eyes told another story. Power had brought her justice, but not peace. Outside, the rain began to fall, slow, deliberate, cleansing. Tomorrow, the world would move on. But for Lena Foster, the war was finally over. The next morning, the world awaited Lena Foster's every move. News cameras swarmed outside Helix Dynamics headquarters, and journalists shouted questions as she stepped out of her car. Her composure was flawless, a tailored navy suit, dark sunglasses, her expression unreadable. If the previous weeks had painted her as a vengeful wife, today she would reclaim her image, not as a woman wronged, but as a leader reborn. Inside the boardroom, every seat was filled. The director sat tense and expectant, folders open, pens ready. The air vibrated with a mix of fear and curiosity. At the far end of the table, Lena stood before the company logo, microphone waiting. For a brief second, she glanced down at her notes, not for guidance, but to steady her breath. Good morning, she began, her voice calm yet commanding. In light of recent events, it's time I speak not as Mrs. Foster, but as the rightful majority shareholder of Helix Dynamics. The cameras clicked in rapid succession. For years, I allowed others to take the spotlight, believing the company was safest when I stood behind it. But silence invites deception. My trust was misused, my name hidden beneath layers of arrogance and greed. That ends today. A murmur swept across the table. Lena continued, her tone unwavering. As of this morning, all former executives involved in the misuse of company funds have been removed. The board will be restructured to ensure accountability and transparency. 2 principles Helix was founded upon. This is not revenge. This is restoration. Martin Graves, standing quietly by the door, watched her with something like pride. He'd seen her rise from heartbreak into authority, wielding power with precision, not rage. A hand went up near the end of the table, an older board member. Mrs. Foster, he asked cautiously, there are rumors you intend to sell your shares. Is that true? Lena smiled faintly. No, I intend to grow them, but I will no longer measure success in billions or board votes. Power means nothing without integrity. Another voice broke through. And your husband? What will happen to him? The room went still. For the first time, Lena's expression softened, not with love, but with something gentler, almost pity. Ryan will face the consequences of his actions, she said quietly. But this company will not be defined by his mistakes or mine. She paused, scanning the faces before her. Helix was never built on a marriage or a man's ambition. It was built on an idea that innovation should serve humanity, not ego. And from this day forward, that vision is mine alone to protect. Applause began hesitantly, then grew into a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Outside, the media had already begun streaming the live broadcast, headlines rewriting themselves in real time. Helix Dynamics restored. Lena Foster reclaims her throne. As the meeting concluded, Martin approached her quietly. You handled it perfectly, he said. Lena gave a small smile. Perfection was never the goal. Pieces. They walked toward the elevator together. For the first time in months, Lena felt the weight begin to lift, not gone, but lighter. Yet deep inside, she knew the story wasn't over. As the elevator doors closed, Martin handed her a sealed envelope. This came for you this morning, he said. No sender. Lena frowned, tearing it open. Inside was a single note written in Ryan's familiar handwriting. You may own the company, Lena, but you'll never own the truth. Her heart sank, and the elevator descended into silence. The sky burned in hues of gold and crimson as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows over the glass walls of Helix Dynamics. Lena stood by her office window, the unopened file lying on her desk like a wound that refused to heal. The note from Ryan still echoed in her mind. You may own the company, Lena, but you'll never own the truth. She had read it a dozen times since morning, and every time, it sliced deeper. What truth could he mean? Everything had already been exposed. The theft, the betrayal, the lies. And yet, the words carried weight, a whisper that something darker lingered beneath the surface. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Everyone had gone home, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The glow of sunset bathed the room in amber light, soft and deceptive, as if the world outside had forgiven her, even when she couldn't forgive herself. Her phone vibrated. It was Martin. Still at the office? His voice asked gently. Yes, she murmured. I can't seem to leave. He hesitated. Lena, I reviewed that envelope Ryan sent. The handwriting, it's fresh. The ink wasn't dry when we received it. Her brow furrowed. Meaning he's alive, Lena. And not hiding. He wants you to know something. Lena's pulse quickened. Then what truth is he talking about? Martin sighed. There's more. I accessed the old Helix archives, the encrypted ones tied to the original founder's trust. There's a restricted folder labeled Project Erebus. It's been hidden for years. Ryan had clearance to it. The name struck her like a spark in the dark. Project Erebus? She repeated. I've never heard of it. That's the problem, Martin replied. The file's been partially wiped, but there's a trail linking it to offshore accounts and your signature. Lena froze. My signature? That's impossible. I know. Which means someone used your identity. I'll keep digging, but if Ryan's message is about this, it's not over. Be careful. She ended the call slowly, her reflection merging with the city beyond the glass. The sun was sinking now, the horizon fading into bruised purple. She turned to the file again. Its weight seemed heavier than paper should allow. Inside were a few typed pages, a USB drive, and a photograph, one she didn't remember ever taking. It showed Ryan standing beside a group of executives in front of a sleek black building marked Helix Global Labs. But in the corner of the photo, behind them, was a faint logo she recognized too well, her family's old company, the one she believed had gone bankrupt 2 decades ago. Her breath hitched. Had Helix been built on her family's assets? Was Ryan's betrayal just a mirror of something she'd done long before, something she didn't even remember? The room darkened as the last rays of sun slipped below the horizon. Lena walked to the balcony, the city lights flickering to life beneath her. For years, she'd lived for control, for power, order, justice. But tonight, standing beneath the bleeding sky, she felt only uncertainty. The door creaked behind her. She turned sharply, but the office was empty. Only the file sat open, the photograph fluttering in the evening breeze. And then her phone buzzed again. A message. No name, no number, just words glowing on the screen. You were never the victim, Lena. You were the beginning. Her fingers trembled. She stared out at the city, the light fading, the silence swallowing everything. For the first time, Lena Foster didn't know if she was the hunter or the hunted. End of story, or epilogue. The truth beneath Helix.